We're following rising tensions between the United States and North Korea. A top official in Pyongyang told our Ben Tracy that if provoked, North Korea is ready to go to war, and it is willing to use nuclear weapons. This comes as the U.S. sends a Navy strike group toward the Korean Peninsula. For more now, we turn to Matthew Koenig in Washington. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and an associate professor at Georgetown University. He also served as a foreign policy advisor during the 2012 Romney-Ryan campaign. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So how would you characterize the threat level from North Korea right now?
Well, unfortunately, it's a serious and growing threat. Our best estimates are that North Korea has enough nuclear material for up to 21 nuclear warheads. They have missiles already capable of reaching U.S. allies and bases in Asia. And they're working on missiles that, unless current trends are checked, will be able to hold the U.S. homeland at risk of nuclear attack. And we think they're making preparations currently for new nuclear and missile tests. So it's a serious and growing threat, and it needs to be addressed.
Matthew, one of our viewers just tweeted at me and said, what if North Korea isn't bluffing and they're able to do what they say? In other words, we know that they can strike the United States with one of their ICBMs. Would they ever, in their, knowing how crazy Kim Jong-un is, would they ever try to successfully detonate or launch a nuclear or attach a nuclear device to an ICBM to try to hit the United States?
Yeah. Well, our best estimates are that they probably don't quite have that ability yet, but they're working on it and will be there soon. I don't think North Korea is planning on launching a bolt out of the blue nuclear attack. I don't think we need to worry about that. But I do think that they're building this large nuclear arsenal as a way for Kim Jong-un to make sure he can hang on to power, so as a way to deter external enemies. So there is always, of course, the risk of a crisis and things spinning out of control. But I don't think a bolt-out-of-the-blue attack is the threat. But as long as they have these weapons, of course, we live under the threat of the possibility that he could decide to use them against us or against our allies or bases in Asia.
Former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morell said earlier that President Obama essentially ignored North Korea for 8 years and that Kim Jong-un wants to return to the days when the U.S. was more willing to run to the negotiating table, those are his words, when North Korea acted out. So would that be a way to deter him?
Yeah, well, our policy before Obama was basically to get into these negotiations with North Korea. They would make outlandish threats, and then we would come to a deal where we would basically pay them off. And so we got into this pattern where North Korea was extorting us. So the Obama administration policy was to essentially ignore North Korea, which made sense given the history. But in effect, what that means is we've stood idly by as this threat has grown. So I think there is a bipartisan consensus now that we do need to re-engage with North Korea on diplomacy to try to cap this program, but at the same time to put in place a policy to defend and deter against the nuclear weapons that exist there today.
Does that policy include sending a Navy strike group to the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah. Well, as I said, our goal is to deter. But one of the things we'd like to make clear to the North Koreans is that if they use a nuclear weapon, that they won't have the ability to use a second or a third, that we do have capabilities to destroy their nuclear capabilities and their missiles, take them off the launch pad. And we also have missile defenses, and our allies have missile defenses to defend against that attack. So I think that's the purpose of sending the extra force there this week, to make the North Koreans realize that if they try to start a conflict, that we have superiority and it won't go well for them.
So if they then, Matthew, decide this weekend to test a nuclear weapon, what should be our response then?
Well, I think generally our strategy should be two-pronged. One, to increase pressure on North Korea as they engage in these missile and nuclear tests. The only way to do that is with China's help. China's been reluctant to do that. But I think there are some ways we can help get China on board with secondary sanctions and other things. So I think that should be the primary response, is increase the sanctions pressure on North Korea as they do this. But also look to strengthen missile defenses in allied countries to make sure our allies feel secure, and also so the Chinese and the North Koreans realize there are real cost in terms of increased U.S. military hardware in the region to respond to these nuclear provocations.
Matthew, we've been talking a lot about the threat vis-a-vis the United States, but I found it very troubling that the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe warned that North Korea may equip their missiles with chemical weapons and threaten Japan. How serious of a threat do you think that is?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a serious threat. North Korea, we believe, has one of the largest chemical and biological weapons stockpiles in the world. So again, I don't think they're going to look to launch an attack, a bolt out of the blue attack, but they do have these capabilities. So if it came to a conflict, I think it's very likely that Kim Jong-un would use biological or chemical weapons in the region. You know, like Assad in Syria, Kim Jong-un hasn't shown himself to be restrained by international norms. So I do think that that's something that would be on the table in the event of a conflict.
One final question for you, Matthew, before we go. How are South Koreans feeling about what has been happening over the last couple of weeks since Donald Trump was inaugurated, but even in the past couple of years? Are they as worried as many people here in this country seem to be?
Yeah, the South Koreans are worried. You know, to some degree, they're surprised that the United States is just now waking up to this threat because they've been living under it for much longer. You know, North Korea is just now working on missiles that might be able to reach the United States, but they've had missiles and artillery that could basically wipe out Seoul for many years. And so I think, at least in the defense community in Korea, there's hope now that the United States is really reawakening to this threat. I think there's hope that we will work together to address it. But obviously, there's fear because it is a serious threat.
Matthew Koenig, thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.